Hi, I'm Susan Shie, and this is one of my early pieces from 1988. Well, actually, I'd been making what I didn't know were called art quilts yet since about 1981, and I just did it as a feminist choice in college. I guess sooner than that, to do women's work, quote unquote, as a painter. So I'd be including sewing in my painting. And so this is 1988. So this is about 7 years, 8 years after I started making art quilts when I was in graduate school. I was living in New York City. This is called Tropical New York. I had a 6 months residency in New York, and I began this piece probably around the time of spring break, because it's the panel in the center is my family, and the adventures in this piece are largely centered around when my husband, who wasn't my husband yet, and my daughter and her two best friends came to visit New York, came to visit me on spring break, and the adventures we had. You'll see the snakes that are going across the middle, and the windows that are going up the middle. Those represent, the snakes are the subways in New York that go everywhere, and the windows are my apartment building that I lived in Long Island City. And those are all dimensional forms, as are the Buddha figures on both sides of them, and the dogs that are yellow, and some faces and things. So this is kind of a transition piece. I had been making dimensional figures on my quilts for a while at this point, and everything is hand sewn, and everything it's painted with a brush. And the piece is 90 by 90 inches. And it has mussel shells down the sides, because when I was leaving New York at the end of my residency, my old advisor from graduate school took me to lunch at an Italian restaurant, and we had mussels. I saved the shells and used some of those, but over the years, some of the mussel shells broke. And I'll tell you, everybody, don't put mussel shells on your quilts because they're extremely breakable, honestly. You can see some of them here. And you'll see down the sides, there's one of the subway signs here about just almost halfway down that it says Broadway and Lafayette. That's one of the subway stops I used, and that's all hand embroidered on a stuffed thing. And this is one of the paintings. This is the waiter that we all fell in love with one night when some girlfriends and I went out to eat together, and he was very sexy, and we all thought he was very cute. And so I had to put him in the piece. And he's painted on, it was probably not silk, probably some kind of synthetic fabric. And then I quilted that piece and added it to it. And this pink creature is this bird named Buffy, that when I got around to opening my windows in the spring at the end of a very cold and very snowy, awful winter in New York, I opened my windows in the air shaft, and I could hear this thing going, Buffy, Buffy. And it sounded kind of weird, and I realized it was this name, and I realized there was a parrot up there in somebody's window, and I couldn't see it because it was the air shaft, but this is what I imagined Buffy would look like. And the figure here, that's the Buddha. There was a Dutch artist at PS1 where I was doing my artist residency. PS1 is now part of MoMA, but then they were using it for an international artist program. And our artist from Holland brought his wife, who was an opera singer and a music teacher, and she offered us a free class in voice meditation. So we worked with all our chakras, and we sent our healing energy with different tones to different parts of our bodies. And that's what all the Buddha girls on there are all about. There's lots of different masks. I think they might represent the different, sort of in general, the fact that New York is full of so many really interesting different ethnicities. And also there's an alligator here in the bottom right. That's because of the story of the alligators in the sewer system in New York, which we don't know if that's a myth or if it's really true, but if it isn't, it sure is a lot of fun. And this is the center of the painting, and one of the subway snakes is going through it. But it's my husband, Jimmy, my boyfriend and live-in partner then, and me in the middle, and my daughter, Gretchen, and then her two friends below us. And then all around in this yellow background, if you look at the whole thing again, you'd see it's a big bubble. I was putting everybody in my family into this big bubble of protection. just feeling that good about that. So there was a restaurant called Two Boots, and up here at the top, you'll see there's a little quilt thrown in that I made that says pecan pie at Two Boots. It was just kind of celebrating a little gathering some girlfriends and I had. Because if you live in a place for 6 months, pretty soon you got a whole bunch of girlfriends, and that was really nice about New York, and these were artist friends. So I wanted to document that. And this guy in the middle with the fruit basket on his head, his name is Tsunami, and he's a lamp that my daughter and I found at the Goodwill store in Worcester, Ohio, where we live. And I probably took Tsunami with me to live in New York, so I'd have some company. But he's very powerful, so he's there. And Tsunami's still alive because I didn't let my daughter take him to college, so he never got broke. So he's still here in my house, and he's in my granddaughter's bedroom now. And he's about a 15-inch tall lamp without a shade. He just has a light bulb on top. And this is the other little, this matches the pecan pie at Two Boots. This is a true story of me going into a crystal shop. I'm into healing crystals, and I was in the shop and someone came in behind me, and then the owner of the crystal shop said, "Get out of here. I know what you did. You took crystals." And the person said, "No, I didn't." And they're arguing back and forth, and I could not turn around and look. I was so scared. So this is just my memory of it, that there's the crystal dropping into the pocket. And they made the person leave, and that was that. But I was afraid there was going to be a shootout. I was so nervous being by myself sometimes. But there it is. I'm not afraid of this anymore because I'm home. And it's a little closer view of it. You can see most of it is painting. It's just acrylic paint painted on. And then back at that point, everything was just hand stitched. I wasn't doing any machine sewing of any of this.
What excites you about art quilts?
Well, what excited me about them in the first place, way back before they were called art quilts, I was painting on stretch canvas when I was an undergrad at the College of Worcester here in town, and I was a painter. And I was painting on canvases. And first of all, I came to this epiphany that I wasn't going to be able to get my biggest paintings out of the place back to my commune unless I had somebody lent me a truck or drove the truck and took them. And I thought, this isn't good, you know? So I asked my advisor, I said, it's kind of at the same time, although I asked my advisor what I could do, and he said, yes, I could take them off the stretcher bars and just use fabric, just use canvas. But at the same time, there was a woman named Miriam Shapiro, who was an artist in New York, a well-known artist in New York, and she and Judy Chicago had worked together before the dinner party. Then they had a falling out, but they worked together for a while. It's a very feminist team of professors in California at Caltech. And so she came to the College of Worcester, where we were having a riotous feminist uprising in not just the art department, but all over the campus. And she did 2 residencies there at my college. And then when I went to graduate school at Kent State, she also came up there and did a residency. So I saw her 3 times. And I saw her other times in New York too. But anyway, the first time I sat with her, she said, well, do you consider yourself an artist or a woman artist? And I thought about it and I said, I'm a woman artist. And she said, well, how do I know that? And I said, well, see, I do this and that, blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, you know, how can you define it better so that it really shows that you're a woman artist? She said, what do you do at home that you don't do here, that you don't think of as art? So I rattled off all the things like sewing and stuff like that. And this was way before quilt arts. So this was maybe 1978. And there were people making art quilts without, none of us knew anybody else was doing it, I think. But people like her were like Johnny Appleseed going across the country, spreading this mild rebellion to make a voice for feminism visually. And it was before the Guerrilla Girls got going and stuff like that, but it was real exciting. So I said to my girlfriends in the art department, you know, let's do a show of women's art. And they would just say things like, I don't consider myself a woman artist. I'm an artist. And women artists aren't going to get treated well. So I'm just an artist. I might not even use my full name. I might just use my initial and my last name, stuff like that. And I thought, well, that's okay. Everybody's got the right to their own way of thinking about it, you know. But I became this artist, this women artist. So I went to graduate school right after Worcester and got to Kent, and here was nothing happening with women's art. there was no slides. There were no slides in the library, the slide library, nothing. So I talked to Miriam Shapiro in New York, and she sent me a whole bunch of slides for our slide library. And then she charged me for them like $100. And I didn't have $100. And she said, well, you know, one of my assistants had to label all these slides and blah, blah, blah. So I went to the director of the School of Art the first time I really talked to him. And I told him what happened. And I said, you don't have any slides of women's art. And here are 100 slides of current living women artists. And I said, I don't have the $100 to pay for them. And he said, we'll buy them. So I was just blown away. And I started a group there called Kent Women Artists. And we would meet every week on, let's say, Wednesday in an art history room that wasn't being used, so we could use a projector if we wanted to show our work. And we started having shows of our work in the area. And we did that for 3 years while I was in grad school. And we had local artists, we had professors, and we had students. And I was a TA. I was a graduate student who taught undergrads drawing 1 and 2. So we had some really interesting energies that happened with that group. And by then it was getting more hip to be, or maybe it's just because it was a state school instead of a small school. I don't know, but there were a lot more artists in a big school to begin with, you know. But we had a very strong group of very supportive artists.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about the artwork that you showed today, or about art quilts in general?
I think art quilts in general are starting to diversify more again. I think there was a period where people were taking a lot of classes, because we in general, you're younger, but the art quilt movement in general is more my age group. And we found each other in the 80s. And then we started teaching classes. And so we had a whole generation of people who were taking a lot of classes, and they were emulating their teachers a lot. And there were a couple of teachers, especially, you could just see this whole movement of people working in their style. And that always bugged the hell out of me, because I like individuality. I want people to do their thing. And yet I realized that these people were in another generation of this movement where they have the name art quilt. And you know, I like when I graduated from the College of Worcester, when I did we have a thesis project there called Independent Study when you're a senior. And it's like Princeton also has it. It's very, very formal. And it's a whole year. And I was working very hard on making my thing my way, but I was calling them soft paintings, because that's the closest thing I could come up with for a description. I was taking unbleached muslin, laying it on the floor of my studio on newspaper, drawing on it. I was really obsessed with Chinese imagery from not just folk art, but like religious Chinese art and things like that, because I saw Oriental art, Eastern art, as very nature-centered instead of man-centered. So this is this feminist talking. So I got really involved with all of these beautiful organic images. And I didn't know about fabric paint yet. If there was fabric paint in the late 70s, I didn't know about it. So I painted with acrylic paint on my newsprint. And I was using this muslin, which is very thin. So I'd have to pick it up while it was drying, or it would stick to the newsprint and be ruined. So I would do that. The work evolved then, because I got done with my IS, which was very Chinese. I even took a class in women in China, taught by a professor who was married to a Chinese woman, and getting really into this Chinese stuff. And then people would say things to me at my exhibition, like, oh, what makes you love China so much? And I would say, oh, you know, it's this organic stuff. It's not really about China. It's about nature. It's about women and nature. And I had made these kimonos, but they were not wearable. They were biographical portraits of women. And I was using calligraphy. I'd go to the library, and the dictionary didn't have English to Chinese. It just had Chinese to English. So I'd have to read the definitions to find the ideograms I wanted, and copy them into my sketchbook, into my first big hardbound sketchbook. So I realized I'd gone too far into this Chinese stuff, because I'm an American. So I go to Kent and I think, okay, what is different I don't want to do Chinese stuff anymore. I don't want people to think this is all about China. This is all about nature and being connected with nature and being a feminist. So I decided to use underskirts. So because that's another thing that defines a woman's shape and is worn by her. And my mother went along with this idea. My mother was a nurse and a very creative person as well. But she and I went to the Goodwill. And for some reason, there were like a whole bunch of underskirts there, the slips. So I come up to the cashier and I have all these slips. And she says, now you can't buy these to resell them. You can only buy a few of them. And I said, but I'm not buying them to resell them. I want to put them in my art. And I started telling her about the project. So she let me buy them. And my mother proudly paid for all the underskirts. She thought it was so cool. So I would collage these underskirts directly onto canvas and then stitch around them and do all this pattern painting and things. And I thought it was so much different. It was so much an American project instead of a Chinese project now. But it still had to do with working with something that went onto a woman's body. And then I got into clothespins along with the underskirts because I did a performance piece of of washing the underskirts. I made a creation story, and the hook line of the chant was, in the beginning there was this woman washing slips. And I had a big wash tub of my mother's, and I had all these clothespins I'd painted up. I would wash the underskirt, hand it to the glass professor, and he would slop it around in the rinse water and kind of mess it up. And then hand it to this woman who would take two of my clothespins, take it out into the audience, and she would hand the next step of the clothesline to the next person in line, and they'd hold it up and they'd pin the clothespin on and pin the slip on. So these slips are, by the time we got done with this creation story and about how the woman goes through life, and it's all about men and women struggling together and how it all turns out. But in the end, we're all standing there holding these slips up. And so then we took the slips, we took them up to the gallery where I was going to have my show, my 20-hour review. And we hung the clothesline from one end of the gallery to the other and back and forth in the middle with all my other artwork around the walls of the gallery. So the next day I had my orals for this 20-hour review for my MFA. And right away, the guy in charge of the review says to me, take down this clothesline. And I said, but this is the piece. This is my main piece. This is from my performance last night. And I said, this is a visual, the artwork that came out of my performance piece. And he says, take it down. He says, I can't see the artwork on the walls because of this. And I said, well, that could be a metaphor for women can't get to their art making because they have to do their house chores. I said, most of us who are women in graduate school have to run a household with cooking, cleaning, washing, all that stuff, as well as doing our work here. So that's, you can think of it that way. It's a metaphor for women's work. It says, no, take it down. So I had to quietly walk around the gallery and take it all down. And I had so much art made and so much art concentrated on this theme, and they gave me an incomplete. And I was just horrified. And they told me that if I would make 4 more pieces within the next month that went with these 4 murals on the wall on cloth that I had considered sort of almost like filler. I liked them, but I was filling up the walls to make sure all the space was used. I thought, that's not what I do. So I told them, I'm not going to do that. How much time do I have before I have to finish my 20-hour review? Because I started it early. And they said, well, you have till next fall. I said, okay, I'll be back. So, so I went back and I took my clothespins and my slips and I went out to the woods. There was a path that I had to walk through to get my walk home. And it was property owned by the campus. And so I strung clothesline in between these trees, and I made a giant circle with several layers of this clothesline wrapping up all around this big circle. And then I started hanging my slips in that thing. And then I had all these rags that I tore out of fabric, and I made up a sign and I asked people to come and help me weave this nest. And we were going to make this nest of women's energy. And I had a whole bunch of friends that would come and weave on the nest and leave me little notes about it. And then I made clothespin bags that looked kind of like insect nests. And they had some of these rags stitched down on the canvas, and they were all painted, and they had fringes hanging down. And inside of each one, you could reach in and find things that reminded me of that woman. And they were each hung on a branch from this woods, which was called Chirpa Forest, which was named by a little girl who named it that because of the birds chirping in there. And they left me a note. That's how I knew that was Chirpa Forest. So I had my second 20-hour review, and it was really all about carrying that stuff from that slip washing thing over to this. And I passed that one in the fall. And I did a performance piece with that too. And I was also told by that 20-hour review in the first place that I was a painter, not a performance artist. So they didn't want to see any performance artists. But by then I had also figured out that there's politics in art departments, just like everything else. I mean, there's 60-some professors in a big school like that. So this time I handpicked my panel. And the one guy didn't know what had happened. And somebody who did know said something to me in the 20-hour review about, well, this is really certainly much more interesting how this is coming out than your last 20-hour review. And the guy says, what last 20-hour review? And I thought, oh, I'm ruined, you know. But it worked. It worked out just fine. I had lots of stuff in that. I mean, I had lots of stuff in the other one too, but it paid to do it early the first time to have a chance to come back later and have a chance to recreate some of it and carry it on and make it into something else.